We're back for another pod, back before Oklahoma, Iowa State in week 5, and back with Guer-in and Emig before we're back in the press box at Owen Field. It's been a couple weeks, Guer-in, since that SMU game, and we're back for the 10th episode of the Letterman Jacket Pod. Number 10, Sooners roster, Jackson Arnold, popular guy. Kip Lewis, another popular guy. When I think 10, Guer-in, my mind does go to the soccer pitch. I think Harry Kane, at least with Tottenham. He wears 9 over in the Bundesliga now, where he wears lederhosen and does photo shoots where he fakes drinking beer. And Landon Donovan, that was like the first number 10 on a soccer field I fell in love with. That 2010 World Cup with Landon Donovan. So that's where my head goes. For you, number 10, what does that number mean?
Well, if you fell in love with Landon Donovan, I, like several 50-somethings who played soccer at a young age, fell in love with Pele. Fortunately, I caught the Cosmos version, not the Brazilian version. Kind of missed that era of the greatest who ever lived, but I default to Pele. As a Steelers fan, it's either Roy Gerela, kicker on the 70s Steel Curtain teams. He was awful, by the way, but he got a great name, and his cheering section, the Gerela's Gorillas.
Elite.
It's beautiful. And then Cordell Stewart, one of my favorite college players of all time, who became one of my favorite utility guys for the Steelers of all time.
I'd also be remiss if I didn't probably mention maybe my favorite number 10 of all time on the soccer field, Diego Armando Maradona, who graced that number and graced every room and pitch he walked into or onto. But, Guerin, we're not here to talk about Maradona. That's a podcast for another day.
I want to know more about Harry Kane faking the beer drinking.
All right, 5-second aside on that.
Who fakes drinking beer?
Well, I'm guessing as an elite athlete, he's probably not like slugging beers midweek in 2023. But he did a photo shoot in Munich. It's Oktoberfest in like traditional lederhosen, and he had a big beer stein in his hand. I'm just guessing it was a photo shoot. It was supremely lame. God, the things he wouldn't have to be doing if he hadn't left Tottenham. Guerin, we are not here as much. Well, shoot, that's another topic you get me going on for a long time. But we're going to talk Iowa State. We're going to hand out some third of the way through the season awards, and we're going to play another game of Guer-in or Guer-out. But first, we're going to kind of dive into that, what I'd say is the prevailing topic if you want to talk about a position group around Oklahoma right now, and it's the running backs. Because 4-0, that's where the Sooners stand. And to this point, I don't think you'd have many other position groups to complain about if you were an OU fan. You'd look at the quarterback play and be pretty happy with Dillon Gabriel. Wide receivers have been good. Offensive line, by and large, good enough. Same for the defensive line. Danny Stutzman, the linebacker, is great. Same for the secondary. But that running back room hasn't gotten going yet. We kind of got more wishy-washy stuff from Jeff Levy Saturday, and Brent Venables made it clear on Tuesday that they don't. If they had a guy, if someone had established themselves, he'd be playing themselves. They'd be playing. But the fact is, they're not there yet, and we go into another week kind of scratching our heads with this running back group.
Yeah, we've both written about this topic, haven't we? Since the win over Cincinnati Saturday, that was my column on Game Day, selloutcrowd.com, guerinandemig.com, and you doubled back to it. Monday? I think it was early this week. And I get the analysis. Here's what I would say to OU fans going a little overboard on the problem. It's what I would tell OSU fans trying to figure out what Mike Gundy's doing with his quarterback rotation, because I think the same questions are being asked Jeff Levy and DeMarco Murray of OU's running back rotation. And that is, you're missing the point. Point is, the issue is up front, not in the backfield, in Norman and Stillwater. And it doesn't matter who has the ball. Let's simplify it for OU. Whether it's Tyree Walker, Javonte Barnes, Marcus Major, or Gavin Sawchuk, or Dillon Gabriel, you're only going to get so much. All right. This is not a drive blocking, run blocking, zone blocking, elite offense. It just isn't offensive line. So what you got to do is find a way to just be adequate, complement the strength of the offense, which is, as we've talked about, Gabriel throwing the ball. And this is going to be okay. This is not going to keep running back position isn't going to keep the Sooners from going to the playoff this year. The offensive line might. Okay. So let's focus. To me, the focus ought to be up front, not so much in the backfield. I don't know if that's a cop-out. That's just how I'm seeing it as of going into Iowa State.
I think it's a fair point. I personally don't think there is one place to point blame with this running back room. I think the offensive line has been great protecting Dillon Gabriel. I think it hasn't been, to your point, elite in any way and may never be elite in terms of a run blocking offensive line. But then I look to the running backs, and whether it's any of theirs, fault, no one's really had a chance to find a rhythm, and they really haven't. They've rotated so much that we haven't seen anyone really run consistently just to really know what's there, other than the fact that surely it's a statement on all four that they haven't picked a guy yet. And then I look at Jeff Lebby, and there's just, it returns to some of last year. And I think any offensive coordinator or big program is going to catch, strays in here and there, but it's the play calling. And is it really setting this group up between the rotation, between what this line is and the play calling? Are they set up to run the ball well? They probably don't need to if they're going to pass as well as they have and make that the strength, and they can protect Dillon Gabriel. But the running game's not gotten going. There's a lot of reasons you could point to for it, but the bottom line is it's not been productive. And while they can maybe get away with, 160 yards per game, which is about what they're at right now, it is showing up. And I think they're going to need it at some point, and right now they don't have it.
Yeah. When Gundy was going through his situation at quarterback, and maybe he still is, we'll find out next week, he challenged either the media or the fan base and say, well, what would you do? And I'd sort of make the same challenge. I mean, is it that, have you seen anyone, and maybe that's the problem, is that DeMarco Murray, the running backs coach, if it's ultimately his call as to who gets the ball, he's not giving someone a chance to stand out. But is there anything that anyone has seen from any of these backs that would lead you to think that guy ought to get the ball more? I went to the Cincinnati game, Eli, thinking that Walker was their hardest runner, and therefore, because of the offensive line's shortcomings, run blocking would be the most valuable carrier, because he'd have to find yards that just aren't there naturally. Well, Marcus Major opened my eyes, in particular on that 19-yard gain on 3rd and 19. And then when he picked up, I think 46, 47 of the rushing yards. No, they got 46 or 47. I think he had 30 of it on the 75-yard drive that essentially won the game in the third quarter. Okay, so I still think it might be Walker. I still don't know if there is such a guy in that rotation. And you can criticize Levy and Murray for not giving someone an opportunity to seize the moment. I see that. I just don't know if even given that chance, it's going to be an obvious call.
That might be the case. I think most OU fans who will be sitting in the crowd Saturday would say, where's Javonte Barnes? Because he's probably the most physically gifted of that unit. I mean, Marcus Major, DeMarco Murray will tell you, is one of the best athletes on the roster. But from what we saw from Javonte Barnes last year and the promise he had, to just everything he carries, he might be that guy, but we haven't seen enough of him. He hasn't played hardly at all in the two meaningful games they've played with SMU and Cincinnati. Gavin Sawchuk, we know, had a hamstring injury that hampered him in camp, and I'm sure has lingered into the season. So we're waiting there. But to your point, if it's none of them, what do they need to do? If they don't have an Eric Gray, which I don't think they do, what has to happen for this offense? Because the fact is, if you look at that first half against Cincinnati, I kind of dove into these numbers in the story I wrote this week. They faced 12 second downs in the first half against Cincinnati when the run game had 35 yards on 18 carries. 8 of those were 2nd and 9 and longer and had been preceded by, I think, 5 run plays. That's where we can sit here and say that the passing game's good enough, but when the run game is leaving them in 2nd and long, frequently, that's where it shows up. And in the second half, when they ran better, that number fell. I think they had 4 second down and 7s or longer, and the offense ran smoother. So that's where the passing game's going to take care of business, I think. They don't need to run, as Walter Rouse said it, 300 yards a game.
Yeah.
They got to have something, and that's why sorting out this rotation is going to matter. And we hear Jeff Lebby and Brent Venables both say it's kind of getting determined week to week in practice. You'd imagine DeMarco Murray's got a lot, if not all of the main input there. They've got to figure out whether it's the right guy or just the right rotation. I think we need to see somebody carry the ball, or 2 guys carry the ball 15 times each to get some semblance of a rhythm. They keep talking about rhythm, and I think this was in a headline of mine that got scrapped, but as a George Michael callback, quiet feet have got no rhythm. They've got to give these guys a shot. Somebody needs a chance. I don't know that I necessarily care who, and maybe you try it out another week, but someone needs to run the ball 15 plus times to see if they've got anything there.
How in the hell are you pulling a Careless Whisper lyric at your age and throwing it into a story about OU's run game?
That's what you get.
What's the story? Who turned you on to that?
I can't tell you who my ghostwriter is, then the whole jig would be up. I don't write any of my own stuff, but I couldn't tell you.
Two things to end this portion of the show. Iowa State does invite you to run the ball. John Heacock is big on dropping into coverage and making it really difficult on the opposing quarterback. So we'll see how Gabriel handles that, and then we'll see what Levy does in response to that with the run game Saturday. And then, of course, there comes the next week's game against, can't remember who.
It's a Texas school. I forget which one of them. OU plays so many this year.
Texas State.
Not that one.
Texas Women's University?
No.
Arden Simmons.
All right. Tarleton State?
It's what's the team that Necessary Roughness 90s movie? They played they shot their games in the old stadium at North Texas. What were they called? What was their
Now you're beyond my depth. Now I impressed you with George Michael, and now you're asking me about 90s movies.
So far off the rails already. When the Sooners play the Longhorns, if you want to win the game, you need to win the rushing battle. It's every year since 1999, but two. The team that rushes for more yards wins the game. So there will be an automatic default to that number next week, and therefore the full attention will be on whether the Sooners have a go-to guy going into the Cotton Bowl.
So perhaps then important that they sort some things out this weekend, and it could be a good opportunity, like you mentioned. It's the top pass defense in the Big 12. It's the top defense in the Big 12 in terms of yardage. Oklahoma's either going to have to go and say we're going to beat that secondary, and no matter what, Iowa State doesn't look like what it did a couple years ago with Matt Campbell. Its defense still does. They're either going to have to say, all right, Dylan Gabriel, this passing attack, go beat them, or figure something out on the ground. Mm-hmm. And that would bode well, not just for this weekend and the future, but the game after it. As you mentioned, they're going to need to have somebody capable of running the ball. Maybe it is Dylan Gabriel against Texas. And maybe we have some answers after Saturday night. To this point, we don't. But you mentioned Iowa State. 6 p.m. Saturday night, Owen Field. Mm-hmm. Sooners are 20-point favorites. And it did strike me that Brent Venables, when he was at the lectern the other day, pointed out all the close games they've played with Iowa State, especially in Norman. I think the last, he said it, OU's 2-1 in those last three visits from Iowa State. The scores are 101 to 100. Think of the last 8 or 9 games they've played with each other, all but one, and it was actually last fall's game in Ames, were decided by 10 points or fewer. So as much as people want to look ahead to Texas this week, I know at least one person who wrote a column looking ahead to Texas. He might even be on the mic as we speak. I don't know that this is a game for Oklahoma to overlook.
What an awful, what a small-minded writer he is. Or she, I guess, or they.
No, he's a hack. For those of you who haven't been at selloutcrowd.com lately, Guer-in Emig did write, and a really good column, looking ahead to OU Texas this week. It was tactful. It was insightful, all those things.
Apparently.
Impactful. I read it.
Here, you know what? The columnist wrote that drivel, even though he sat there and watched Iowa State come into Norman 6 years ago against a 4-0, 30-point favorite. OU is a 20-point favorite, right? Saturday. Mm-hmm. Sooners were minus 30 in this game 6 years ago. They'd beaten Ohio State in Columbus. Everyone was gaga over Lincoln Riley. OU was up 14 points in the first half. Everyone's thinking about, where are you going to go drink your booze at halftime, and then you look up 2 hours later, and it's 38-31 Iowa State. One of the weirdest games I've ever covered at Owen Field, because there was nothing. If you go back and look at the stats of that game, there's nothing in the stat sheet that tells you from turnovers to total yards to first downs that tells you where OU went wrong, and yet they went wrong, and they did it against a quarterback named Kyle Kempt, Eli, who I think had thrown 2 passes in his life before that game. He threw for 3-something on the Sooners. If he can do that, then Rocco Becht can probably do something similar this weekend after throwing for 348 against OSU.
That's the point right there, is that I don't blame anybody overlooking this game, looking ahead to Texas. Iowa State, they've lost to Ohio. They are still under the cover of a sports betting investigation. They don't have their starting quarterback, the guy who was supposed to be the starting quarterback at the start of this year. Plenty to overlook there, except for the fact that Iowa State always plays teams tough, always plays Oklahoma tough in Norman. You broke down the biggest piece of history right there. And the fact is, they are getting better. They were good enough to beat Oklahoma State a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
We'll know maybe in a few weeks what that even means, a win over Oklahoma State. But the point is, for an Oklahoma team that in the two meaningful games that's played, SMU and Cincinnati, didn't close the door on either team until the fourth quarter fully. I don't know why anyone would sit around and say, yeah, Oklahoma's just going to steamroll a Power 5 opponent. Where there's a lot to be optimistic about right now with OU, but I don't think we're at that point yet.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact is, this is another challenge for them. The defense of Iowa State is probably going to at least limit some of the scoring, and while Oklahoma's defense, I think, can probably do enough to contain Rocco Beck, who Brent Venables is very complimentary of. I think there'll be more of a game here than some are thinking, and I think the Sooners better not be thinking ahead to the Longhorns quite yet.
Yep. Yeah, and again, the knee jerk from the OU base in response to my warning about 2017. Well, look what Kyle Kemp was throwing against. I mean, that was.
Yep.
We may not have known it just yet, but behind the curtain, that thing was a mess defensively, and it was just going to get worse. Okay, clearly this defense is trending the opposite direction. I'm just saying we've seen this happen before. Circumstances being different 6 years later. There is a script. There's a script here for Matt Campbell to follow.
Certainly is, but you mentioned that secondary for OU, and I think this presents an opportunity for them. Mm-hmm. For Oklahoma, the run game is what maybe they attack Iowa State's defense with, but I think Iowa State's going to go to the air. Rocco Becht had a pretty solid showing, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns against Oklahoma State. But this week, he's going to see an Oklahoma secondary that not only has played really well and is rotating guys and feels deep, but they're creating turnovers.
That's right.
7 interceptions in the last 2 games. A lot of help from Tulsa there, but they're making plays. I think the confidence is building. You talk to somebody like Key Lawrence, who got name-checked within Brent Venables' 9.5-minute sermon on the defense and buy-in and all that during his press conference Tuesday. He's playing well. Gentry Williams has been really sturdy as that second guy at cornerback. Woody Washington, as Brent said, kind of been the model for that secondary. So a unit that's really operating well, I think, is going to get thrown on this weekend. And I think we're going to see a bit more of what they're made of again before a really big test against Texas.
Yeah. No, Iowa State's going to throw. They don't have a running game, Eli. They just don't. They didn't just lose their starting quarterback to the gambling sting. They lost their returning leading rusher, Jarrell Brock, and so they just don't have a running game. And so the Sooners shouldn't have to score more than 24, right? I mean, to be safe.
Well, they had enough last weekend, right? They had 34 a week ago, Iowa State, didn't they?
Yeah, but again, circumstances being different. But I think it is. Campbell's only shot to move the ball is through the air with Becht. He does have a couple of really good receivers. Both had very productive games against OSU last week. I don't see it happening, but again, I'd never even heard of Kyle Kemp 6 years ago, and all he does is torch a third-ranked OU team that had beaten Ohio State 2 weeks earlier. So fairy tales do come true.
This, and we've already hit on kind of the points with the run game and the passing game, but to me, while we've been spending so much time so far this fall focused on the defense and, hey, can they keep it up? This is the week I look to the offense. And next week, too, with Texas. They're playing 2 elite defenses in the next 2 weeks. This is whether it's getting the running game going or showing us, even more in the passing game, this is the time for the offense, for Jeff Lebby, for Dylan Gabriel, and everyone on that side of the ball to show us something, because I think we've got a lot to learn still, even as impressive as they've been. And we're certainly going to find out these next 2 weeks. Well, Guerin, we're now going to jump into they're not quite mid-season awards. We're 4 games in, and maybe at 4 wins, you would probably assume a bowl game, but 12-game schedule. We are a third of the way into the season. Time flies, doesn't it?
It's like a first intermission of a hockey game.
Indeed.
It's something you know a little about, I hear.
I've got that photo not far from me and my hockey pad, 7 years old. You've seen it.
The world needs to see it, Eli.
Well, perhaps, I don't know. Maybe one of these days we'll do a little show and tell. But we're doing third of the way through the season awards for the Sooners. looking at who shined early on, which position groups have been improved, and all that. We're going to start. I want to know your offensive MVP not named Dillon Gabriel to date. Who is that?
Probably Andrew Anthony, because I think he's, if we're spoiling the next question, if wide receiver has been the biggest, right, has made the biggest jump in terms of a position from last year to this, there's got to be a keystone for that. And I think we've reached the point where it's pretty clearly Andrew Anthony. If we weren't sure what the Sooners were getting from the Michigan transfer, there was a lot of anticipation. There was a lot of potential. It's starting to settle in that it wasn't just speed and potential to get open, but the ability to finish plays after getting open and running deep posts or goes down the sideline. And that is a big boon for Dillon Gabriel. If you're going to ask me about an offensive MVP at first intermission, not named Dillon Gabriel, it's only fair that I ask you for a defensive one, not named Danny Stutzman, because it's just as obvious, right, on defense?
I think so. I think Danny Stutzman and Dillon Gabriel. If we were just talking MVPs, those would be the two names you'd pick. I know that you could look at Jaren Kanak, who I think is off to an incredible start. He really feels like Danny Stutzman 2.0. It doesn't help the fact that they are, tied at the hip, and Brent Venables called him frickin' frack. They're buddies, but the trajectory for Jaren Kanak has been very Stutzman-like to this point, and that should have OU fans excited. To me, though, Woody Washington has almost been the unsung guy. He's playing more snaps than anybody in that secondary. He's not getting thrown too often. I think some have conflated it to people are just staying away from it entirely. It's not the case, but he's been really impressive. He's been, I know we've said Danny Stutzman, the connective tissue on certain, in this defense, but in that secondary, he's been the guy for a unit that struggled so mightily last year. They're so much better this year, and I think it starts with him. So he's been, I think, that guy through the early weeks. Who, after Danny Stutzman, I look to Woody Washington as the guy making this offense go. Throwing it back to you, you've told us what you think of one wide receiver. I think I know where this is going. But most improved position group, where are you looking at? Maybe I'll say most improved position group that's not the wide receivers.
Well, it's a cop-out if I said linebackers, right?
You can do whatever you'd like. You'll be judged by the public. That's all.
It's a race. Well, here it is. It's a 3-horse race, my man. It's wide receiver, linebacker, and secondary. But there are little asterisks, I think, next to each one. How if the coverage is a little stickier the next couple of weeks for Anthony and Jaden Gibson and Drake Stoops. And name your Nick Anderson, name your wideout. How do they continue to get open and latch on to one-on-one balls? Because they have so far, but I think it's fair to wonder as again the competition ratchets up if that's going to keep happening. And then on defense, Stutzman and Kanak are running everything down, and 90% of the time making the play after they've run something down. But what happens the week that I don't know if they're going to. Here's what's I guess in OU's favor this year. I don't know if there's a Bijan Robinson on the schedule, right? Texas is okay running the ball, but the strength of their offense is when Ewers drops back and throws to Worthy, right, or A.D. Mitchell or Jatavion Sanders, not when he hands it to Jonathan Brooks. Is there a running back in the Big 12 that's really going to make life difficult for Stutzman and Kanak at the point of impact? And then that leads me, I think, to the answer here, and that really is the secondary, because I think we're going to find out over the next 4 to 6 weeks definitively how much more grown up that back end has become under Jay Valai and Brandon Hall. They look great so far. Their coverage is fine. Their ball location is fine. They're making interceptions. That's the most important thing. They're actually gaining takeaways when they have the chance to, something that just they failed miserably at a year ago. Venables has said as much. So I think I'm going to land on the secondary, and that's sort of wishful thinking, because I think if it's not the most improved position, OU ceiling is only so high. If you're asking me about the most improved position, do you land on a most improved player from last year to up to this point?
You might. And so what? Your answer there is Danny Stutzman then?
For the most improved player?
Oh, shoot.
No, I'm
No.
asking you.
Well, you're asking me. Well, Danny Stutzman could land there, but he would feel unfair. So I think you got to start a little lower, right, on our most improved. And there's plenty of spots to look around to. Gentry Williams comes to mind again as didn't see a ton of the field last year, injured toward the latter half. But the fact that he's held down that second cornerback spot really with no issue. I feel like all you want, at least starting out for a sophomore cornerback in a starting role, is to not hear his name all that often, at least in a negative context. And he's made plays. He's been active. He hasn't been picked on. All that's been really impressive so far. Where my mind goes, it's back to the wide receivers and Nick Anderson, who's giving them a guy that they didn't have a year ago, both in terms of depth and even what he can do, and appears to be of the young wide receivers. We might have looked at Jacquez Petaway or Jaden Gibson and said that's going to be the young guy to step up. But It's been Nick Anderson. He was out all last year with an injury. To that point, maybe it's not improvement, just availability. But he's a touchdown threat, 2 touchdowns in 4 games. It was a nice, easy one, I think. I won't take away from it, but at Cincinnati, just a little pitch from Dylan Gabriel. But there was that other spot. They went to him on a 3rd down where he picked up, I think, 18 yards. And that's where he separated himself, at least on one play, from being just a home run hitter, touchdown guy to if he's another productive receiver that they can throw to on critical downs, it's a major improvement from last year, and it gives Dylan Gabriel in this offense another weapon. So I've been really impressed by him thus far. I think it's a very promising start both for 2023, but really a guy who I think is designated as a redshirt freshman, what he could be for the future here. We already hit on Andrell Anthony, so we're going to take him out. But transfer MVP, well, we're both going to give answers to these last 2.
Okay.
So let me hear it.
Transfer MVP outside of Andrell? I think it's going to end up being Dasan McCullough. It's just a matter of time.
Yep.
I don't think there's any doubt. And that's too bad. In a way, that's too bad for Justin Harrington because it's his injury and McCullough's return from to health that's opened the door pretty wide for the Indiana.
This too.
I'm sorry?
I'll say this too. Most improved player would have been Justin Harrington if he was
still
healthy,
right.
And we knew kind of where it was at, because he's the jump he made from guy who had left the program to not only a leader but a guy who they were starting ahead of Dasan McCullough at Cheetah was incredible. So it's a shame we're not really sure where he's at, and that was me interrupting you, but he would have been that guy. But you're right, Dasan McCullough probably factors in as your likely end of season transfer MVP, I think.
And one more thing about this, Eli, it would be helpful for OU's situation defensively if that gap closed, and in that, if someone up front closes the gap on McCullough, whether it's Rondell Bothroyd, DJ Terry, or Trace Ford, because that was the intention, right, going into the year, is ballyhoo to transfer as McCullough was. Everyone focused on the patchwork being done up front. Immediate help to bolster a defensive line that wasn't nearly strong enough a year ago in the Big 12. And we've talked about the ramifications of that, not just this year, but moving forward in the SEC. So what Sooner fans need to see between now and December is for there to be more impact from transfers on the defensive line. It's coming in spots, right? It's in moment. Bothroyd had a very impressive, one-handed sack.
That didn't count, got called back.
Right, but the video that our friend, Josh Calloway, I think, shared, I think he might have caught. I hope I'm not shortchanging anyone. Anyway, that's the kind of impact play that Venables needs more of up front from transfer guys.
Indeed. I'd say under the radar one would be Troy Everett, the App State transfer, who when Savion Byrd got benched in week 2 and left injured in week 3, he stepped in. He started at Cincinnati. Guy who's going to be versatile. I think an exciting guy if you're really getting into the weeds on offensive line depth. The fact that he's so versatile and has, including this year, at least 3 in front of him of eligibility. I think you're going to see that name and that face on that offensive line for a few years. And promising start just in terms of what he's been able to do. He's not up there with the importance probably of a Dasan McCullough or some of those guys up front on defense, but they've been missing their starting left guard at different points of 3 of the 4 games now, and he's been there. And so I think that's felt like an underrated one. He committed in the spring, and I think would have missed spring camp, but he's been big and important to them. We're going to close here on these awards. Danny Stutzman, David Ugwoegbu, and Deshaun White each were the only 3 Sooners to play more than 900 snaps a year ago. So, the Stutzman Ugwoegbu White Ironman Award. who's going to finish this season with the most snaps among Sooner defenders? To date, Danny Stutzman's at 227, Woody Washington 221, Jaron Kanek 218, and Billy Bowman at 202. Who do you got?
That's got to be Washington.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
And is that? I think that's a safer hedge because I think he is going to have to play every snap there, whereas Danny Stutzman can get shuffled out.
Well, I also think that Woody has a better chance of staying healthy. And I do think that as much comfort as someone like Kanek. I mean, if Stutzman and Kanek are, Linus's blanket right now for that defense. I get it. I understand that. I just think that the physical nature of that position eventually takes a toll. There's eventually going to be a week where they go deep into the bench. And if it's not a case of like Kanek missing some of the end of the Cincinnati game with his issue, it's a knee tweak, it's an ankle twist, it's something like that. Assuming Washington stays healthy and continues to cover guys stride for stride, that's another blanket essentially for Venables' defense. So I'd actually think it might be Washington.
Well, it's a good, smart, strategic point because I think the fact is Woody Washington is available. He's going to play close to every snap because the drop off, and it's not a knock on anyone else, but the knockoff from him to say Kenai Walker, Kendall Dolby is larger than already we've seen them swap out Kip Lewis in important moments in the fourth quarter against SMU for Danny Stutzman. They can probably spell him a bit better. However, I'm staying with Danny Stutzman.
Okay.
He's got his Butkus Award candidacy underway. He's on pace for something like 140-something tackles. So I'll stick with him for the Ironman Award. We'll revisit these and see how poorly our takes age come the end of the season.
We don't burn this recording every week.
I wish. I mean, do you really want it out there? The race car from a few weeks ago? That's forever on the internet.
That's not circulating still, is it?
Depends on what
group. 5 running tread marks over my cheek and forehead.
I don't know what group chats you're in, but mine still have that video circulating plenty. All right, we're closing out another game of Guer-in or Guer-out. We're going to start on a bit of a food kick. We were just in Cincinnati. You, depending on who you ask, so to speak, dodged a bullet, but a big group of us got over to Skyline Chili, got to try it out. Guer-in or Guer-out on Skyline?
Since I wasn't there to eat it, how can I even answer the question?
Haven't you had it before? You've been. Don't wait. That was really slick, but not slick enough.
I think I'm on record as Guer-outing Skyline Chili. No, you know what? How I phrased it? Guer-in for lunch, Guer-out for dinner. Never ever eat it.
You did. So
let's just stay there since I missed your luncheon on Friday.
I would put myself in as Guer-out, but a quick little aside: Dasan McCullough is Dasin on Skyline because he's from Ohio. Had a bunch of folks at the game the other day. However, afterward, it was him and Jonah Luulu who were handed Kansas Skyline Chili. I think they were just supposed to pose with it, but in the throes of a 14-point road win, said let's really up it. They took the tops off the cans and both did a shot of Skyline. And even Dasan, who says he's a lover of Skyline Chili, was not thrilled with the lukewarm, unheated up can of chili. I wouldn't, kind of like a green eggs and ham deal. There's nowhere I think at this point you can get me to eat more of that.
How does it come out in shot form? I mean, isn't it like a can of Hormel or Alpo? Where
I don't know how it
takes
out.
The form of the can. The meat does. I mean, did it? So how did they actually get it? Is there liquid? Is there a liquid?
Well, I think a defining trait, no matter how you feel about Skyline Chili and that Cincinnati style of chili, is it is kind of watery. So presumably they just got a bunch of cinnamony chili water, which again, depending on how you feel about that chili.
That's your base description of Skyline Chili right there.
Well, there you go. We should move on before we get into more trouble.
It's better than comparing it to a can of dog food, which I just did.
Well, on to another, now Skyline is part of the Big 12 footprint. Another one that's been a favorite on the Big 12 footprint for a while, Iowa State related. You'll find them in Des Moines. Barry Trammell's a lover. Fong's Asian pizza or Chinese pizza. Mm-hmm. I know we've had that together. You Guer-in or Guer-out?
Guer-out. Some things we do for Barry Trammell. Dining at Fong's is unfortunately one of them.
Yeah, indeed. but had one real fun night there. I think maybe it'll be our last fun night there at Fong's.
Well, there are reasons for that we can't go into on this forum. You have to catch the after show, folks, for the for the rest of that story.
For those who want to peel back on the glamorous life that we live, Guerin, you and I, on Tuesdays before Brent Venables' presser, and this actually is a really nice feature of the game week in Norman. Media who show up to that press conference are treated to a meal from one of the stadium vendors, folks who have their food on game days at a Memorial Stadium. And Cup Bop, the Korean bowl place, that was our lunch on Tuesday. Very popular within the beat. You Guer-in or Guer-out on Cup Bop?
Guer-in.
It was a you know what, it lifted spirits. Not that spirits needed lifting the other day, but a Cup Bop Tuesday for all of those who are concerned about the overall mood of the media in Norman, because I'm sure there's so many. It was a good day. It was a good day in Norman.
Yeah.
All right, on to football. Guer-in or Guer-out, 100-yard rusher this week. Is it going to be the time that you get it? We've only had it once with Tawi Walker. Is this going to be the week it happens, or going to be another week of at the very best rotation, at the very worst ineffective running?
Guer-out on the 100-yard OU rusher.
Who would it be if you had to pick one?
Going back to my man Tawi Walker.
I do still think he's been the most impressive. That's not to say he's the very best or the most talented, but in the spurts we've seen him, and to your point of what you really need from a running back at this point, he's the guy. If you said get me 3 to 5 yards, I'd look to him. See what they do this weekend. Sooners have yet to allow an opponent to score more than 20 points. I know we kind of hit on what they might need just to get beyond Iowa State. Is that going to happen for another week? Hold another opponent under 20? Guer-in or Guer-out?
Guer-in. Under 20 for the Cyclones.
Taking it to your alma mater. Is Kansas the third best team in the Big 12? Guer-in or Guer-out on that?
Guer-in deliciously. Guer-in to the nth degree. Nth degree that Kansas is third in the Big 12 right now. Even though some hack columnists dismissed 3 through 12 in the Big 12 power poll this week as whatever. That was a columnist talking. This is the podcaster saying that KU is head and shoulders a third-ranked Big 12 ascending power.
You know what? I heard some thunderous yells coming from the north. I didn't realize that was the folks in Lawrence reading another Guerin Emig column.
I think those are the folks in Manhattan bleeping on another Guerin Emig column.
Get in line. All right. Well, on the subject of Kansas here, because you in your column, you also in writing a column like you did that I think speculated both Red River teams are going to show up undefeated to the Cotton Bowl on October 7th. Kansas plays Texas this weekend. Oklahoma's got Iowa State. Will both teams, you Guer-in or Guer-out on both teams showing up undefeated?
Doubling back on the last 1 minute of the show, I'm Guer-inning OU and Texas both being 5-0. That's too cool to. It's a proposition. It's too cool to pass up. First time since 2008. They wrote books about that 2008 game, Eli. You just haven't read them yet because you don't read. But otherwise,
I was in the 4th grade in 2008.
I know. Yeah. Thank you for that.
All right, finishing here. Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift. You Guer-in or you Guer-out?
Couldn't be outer. I'm so tired of that, man.
What are you most tired of?
Well, number one, it's hard for me to make headspace for the NFL covering a college football season. So that's really not Travis Kelce's fault. It's not Taylor Swift's fault that I find her. I mean, she's fine. I respect the voice.
Careful
now.
The music. Careful now.
I know. Respect the music, respect the voice, but I've always been Team Beyonce. All right? If Beyonce was potentially dating Travis Kelce, I'd be Guerin.
It'd be a much more interesting story.
Well, because for several reasons, right?
Well, you're talking to a Swiftie, not like a hardcore Swiftie, not a examining the condiments on Taylor Swift's chicken finger plate kind of Swiftie, but I warn you here, be careful. But I also think this might be a Hollywood contrivance to the one of the most poorly veiled ones too on this front.
Beyonce's still spoken for, right?
Correct.
Okay, there.
Jay-Z.
That we'd be getting into legality if she was dating Travis Kelce. So
Brett Yormark's buddy, Jay-Z.
yeah,
Big 12 commissioner.
right.
Now here's a bonus Guer-in, Guer-out. Are you Guer-in, Guer-out that Yormark's going to be at the Cotton Bowl on October 7th?
We did have this sports writers and cars on the way to meetings this week.
The lamest sequel to comedians in cars getting coffee.
Let's revisit this next week. I got to think about this.
Right.
Since it's a bonus question, you got to give me a week of thinking about it.
Reasonable. And the good news is we'll be back next week, pre-OU Texas. But before then, we've got OU Iowa State, and we've made our piece on that. We're going to find out how it goes Saturday. So that's going to do it on this latest edition of the Letterman Jacket Pod. You can find us, as always, YouTube, Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of our fine work at selloutcrowd.com. Guerin, you writing anything good before the weekend that people should know about?
Apparently not.
Well, yeah, I said good. Are you writing anything before the weekend that the people should know about? I don't know if I want
to advertise after having my reputation just mud-bogged during the course of this show.
Well, I do know you did a very interesting interview for the next episode of Mind Games with Guer-in and Emig.
That's right. Talking softball with our friend Kenny Gajewski. So thank you. I will plug that part of that contribution to the Sellout Crowd Network. That is coming to an Apple, Spotify, Google, outer space outlet near you. So
fabulous. Well, we will be back on the Letterman Jacket after the Sooners take on Iowa State. Until then, thank you for listening, and come find us at selloutcrowd.com.